In this panel, we have 4 speakers. We are going to look at the family care practices of older persons in the Southern African region in multi-layered institutional and cultural contexts across the region. Now, there are more than 64 million people aged 60 years or older in sub-Saharan Africa, and this population is projected to more than triple to 220 million by 2050, a more rapid rate of increase than any other region in the world. Now, these numbers have made aging and family care in Southern Africa a priority for policymakers, and the papers here today explore the political and gendered economies and cultures of family care of older people across these 4 countries in the region, so in Lesotho, Zambia, South Africa, and Namibia. Now, the UN Decade of Healthy Aging 2020 to 2030 states that reliance on family care alone is unsustainable. And this message is particularly important when considering the context of aging well across countries in the region, where there are many challenges, including poverty, HIV/AIDS, COVID-19 pandemic now, migration, as well as a context where older persons make substantial contributions to the labour and care economies themselves. They are often the linchpins of care support within families. So by focusing on the concept of familialism, the papers in this panel will unpack the challenges in ensuring sustainable and equitable structures for the care of older people, not only in the region, but perhaps also with implications for aging populations elsewhere. So let me introduce you to the 4 speakers in the panel. First off, myself, I'm Elena Moore. I'm an associate professor at the Sociology Department at the University of Cape Town. And over the last 2 years, we've been developing a network on the care of older persons in the region, which includes scholars as well as government officials and representatives from local and international NGOs. We've hosted several workshops and seminars, and we're excited about a forthcoming special issue on family caregiving in the region, and that will hopefully be published in the coming months in the International Journal of Care and Caring. Now, the 3 speakers joining me today are Ms. Thandie. She's a lecturer at the National University of Lesotho, who will be presenting on and speaking about masculinity and family care over the life course for older Basotho men in Lesotho. Next, we will have Dr. Isaac KABELENGA. He is based at the Humanities faculty at the University of Zambia, and he will share his paper on normative understandings of good family caregiving of older people in rural and urban Zambia. And finally, we will hear from Dr. Janet ANANIAS. She's based at the Department of Psychology and Social Work at the University of Namibia, and she will look at family caregiving of older people in marginalized communities in Namibia. So that's what we have for the panel today. We have 4 speakers. Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Elena Moore again, and today I'm going to be talking about family care of older persons in the Southern African context, particularly in South Africa. And I'm going to put a focus on employed female family caregivers. So in Southern African states and in South Africa particularly, the states depend heavily on families for the care of older persons. Policy texts to support the development of equitable and sustainable family care of older persons rarely recognizes the gendered, racialized, and class assumptions about who is providing care and under what conditions. These silences ignore the conditions under which caregiving and receiving are experienced. Now, in this paper, I argue for a more complex and nuanced understanding of the ways in which families care under what's been called a crisis of social reproduction, where higher unemployment, rising acute illness amongst the elderly, and post-independent economic and social policies have increased the demand on families and family resources. So in this way, I support the UN Decade of Healthy Aging 2020-2030, which states that reliance on family care alone is unsustainable. Now, at the heart of family responsibility lies the concept of familialism, a core construct that frames discussions around care. And in different policy and legal texts at the national, regional, and continental level, we see strong beliefs about the centrality and responsibility of families for their individual members. Now, underpinning policy texts are strong customary expectations to care for others, especially older parents, which is considered a moral duty. Now, in South Africa, beyond policy texts and legal texts, and the judiciary and the courts have relied heavily on the concept to demonstrate the normative expectation for young adults to care for older persons. These familialist assumptions about family care are underpinned by a cultural ethos of interdependence, understood through the African philosophy of Ubuntu. Now, writing on the concept in the South African context, many feminist scholars have distinguished between Ubuntu talk and Ubuntu do. Although Ubuntu talk may embody values of equality and dignity in caregiving, this may not translate into practice in context of social inequality. Now, in practice, many South Africans navigate between the opportunity and constraints of markets, state, and kin, and between these dominant norms and values that accompany these. So whether and how future care needs can be met by family care depends on the availability of family carers in younger generations. In this paper, I focus on the experience of caring for a co-residential older person amongst a group of employed co-residential female family caregivers. Now, again, I argue that the care to older persons in South Africa must be understood first in context of multiple family responsibilities. Second, that care for older persons and family members occur in a context of inequalities that remain in post-colonial contexts, where there's highly uneven access to material resources, high levels of unemployment and poverty, and limited social welfare provision. So when care is understood in this way and in this context, we see how women's position within wider care relations as care providers and caregivers allow us to kind of see elements of differentiation between women who occupy very different class racial positions. Now, care for older persons in South Africa has a new impetus owing to three interrelated factors. The first is the rapidity of aging in South Africa that I mentioned in the introduction, but this is combined with the structure of social security for older persons. Secondly, there is the feminization of the labor force and the coupling of women's informal caregiving with paid work, including paid work in the formal economy. And third, in particular in the context of Southern Africa, due to the ongoing impact of HIV, COVID-19 pandemic, and high unemployment, there's this heightened crisis of social reproduction. So a specific feature in South Africa of the care context for older persons is also shaped by low rates of marriage and very high rates of woman-led households. So by focusing on employed women who are caregivers for co-resident older persons in multi-generational households, the care challenges they have experienced in balancing these multiple care responsibilities with each other and with employment can be drawn out and expand our understanding of care. Now, when we think about older persons in South Africa, South Africa has by far the largest number of older persons in the region, with approximately 5.5 million people over the age of 60 currently. That represents about 9% of the population, but that is estimated to grow to up to 20% of the population, up to almost 11.5 million by 2050. The majority of older persons live in multi-generational households, so over 2/5 of Black South Africans and over 1/3 of coloured older persons who are South African live in triple or more generational households. But there are stark gender differences which lie behind these numbers, as more women compared to men, so 70% of women compared to 40% of men, live in multi-generational households. Now, there is significant financial support for older persons in South Africa compared to its regional counterparts. And the old age grant is the main source of income for most older persons, especially those living in rural areas and in women-headed households. So approximately 3.7 million older persons over the age of 60 receive this grant, and approximately 2 out of every 3 of these are paid to women. So research has indicated on the health side of things that specific health concerns exist in the country, including the increase of non-communicable diseases, and more than half of the elderly population have high blood pressure, whilst diabetes affects nearly 70% of the elderly. So despite the prevalence of chronic conditions, only 22% of the elderly have medical insurance, a fairly class-based phenomenon. Now, access to healthcare, be it private or public, is coupled with the forms of formal institutional care in South Africa, which is highly limited and is intended for the very frail and dependent, quote unquote, elderly needing full-time care. Now, the rollback of publicly provided care contrasted with the expansion of financial assistance, explaining much of why the state remains dependent on the family for the delivery of care of older persons. However, over the last few years, there has been growing concern about the financial viability of the limited public care provision, as provinces have been cutting spending or funding, especially during the pandemic. So given the state depends on families for the care of older persons, and many publicly subsidized facilities are on the brink quote-unquote brink of collapse, research on care and knowledge about care provided by families is all the more crucial. In South Africa, like other parts across the region and the global south, when an older person requires care, a woman will do it. And given the absence of adequate institutional care across the board in the country, it's highly likely that the same woman already assumes primary responsibility for the physical and financial care of children and for the care of for people living with disability and HIV-related illnesses. Now, older persons themselves in South Africa are key caregivers to children and other family members. So if an older person becomes ill and requires significant care, caregiving for the older person may be coupled with taking on care responsibilities that the older person once carried. This will be demonstrated shortly in the findings. As I mentioned, the prevalence of women-headed households across South Africa is growing. About 40% of all households in the country are women-headed. But the research tells us, and the findings tell us, that women-headed households are more financially vulnerable, as they tend to be home to more children, more people living with disabilities, and the unemployed, particularly unemployed working-age adults. Now, at the same time, more women are also engaging in paid work in South Africa, where Black South African women are responsible for much of the increase in the labour force participation, and most of the jobs recorded for women are in wage employment. So what I'm going to display and highlight today is the findings based on a larger project being conducted on intergenerational relationships and support in South Africa. Now, participants for the study were recruited in Cape Town and Johannesburg, with 70 households participating. And this paper focuses on, and this presentation focuses on, employed women's co-residential experience of care for an older person in 50 households across the 2 sites. So what do the findings tell us? The findings highlight how an older person's need for care is embedded in existing care relations and interdependencies. Employed women in low to middle income households have less household money and greater responsibility to more dependents, often stemming from the care responsibilities that the older person once carried. This will be demonstrated in a moment. Moreover, the flow of international caregiving towards nieces, nephews, aunts, and uncles includes both horizontal, vertical, and also diagonal flows of care, which is a critical role played by many uncles and aunties in South African families. In contrast, women employed who are employed and act as caregivers in middle to upper income households have greater material resources, allowing them to pay for care. Furthermore, their care responsibilities are generally limited to their own children or own parents, rarely extending beyond to adult siblings, nieces or nephews, or aunts or uncles. Now, this becomes clear when we look at 2 examples. So here I have a family map, and we're going to talk about Joy, who's in the grey shaded box at the bottom left of the screen. Joy's a teacher, and she explained how she cares for an older aunt who has diabetes and is living with a disability. Joy and her sister Anna, who's also in the other grey box, effectively share a household and its responsibilities, although they live in 2 separated parts of their home. Now, Anna, on the right of the screen in the grey box, lives in the main house with her 1 daughter, her uncle Voyo, who's 67, her uncle's girlfriend, and her older aunt Zedwa, who has a disability and who Joy is looking after. Joy lives in 2 rooms in a converted garage on the same plot with her 2 children, Anna's other daughter, and a newborn. Now, despite being gainfully employed as a nurse, Joy is struggling to meet the financial needs of the household. This is due to the cost of her extensive caregiving responsibilities, which leave her financially and physically drained. But it's also as a result of the way in which material resources are not being shared equally across the household. Now, unfortunately, Anna is unable to support the household financially, but Voyo and Zedwa both receive an old age grant, but Voyo doesn't share his, and he has control over Zedwa's old age grant. So Joy has requested that he contributes a portion to the shared cost, but he does not share any of this, although Joy is now responsible for caring and cooking for Zedwa. Joy moved back into the family home when she discovered that the aunt was not being cared for properly, as she and required much better nutrition and care. Now, the complexity of social relations and household dynamics is evident in this family, who live beside each other, share many tasks, but material resources are kept separate. And the gendered aspects of taking on practical care activities, but also the financing of such, is clear. Now, if we contrast this to an example of a household and a female caregiver in a middle to upper income household, we can look at Mariam's household. And the sample of women in households included women who had access to more material resources, either through individual income or household income. And in such households, financial and material resources ease the care burden in two ways. Firstly, caregivers could live in a larger house, which could accommodate an older person better. And secondly, they could pay someone else to provide home-based care and reducing the constraints on their own time. So here in this example, we have Mariam. Mariam is a 56-year-old Muslim divorcee who had worked as an accounts manager for a large multinational company for over 30 years. Now, when her mother became ill and required full-time care, she resigned and moved into a new house to better accommodate her parents. And by that time, her adult child had left home and was a professional and gainfully employed. At the same time, Mariam invited her brother to move into the house and lives in the Carton Cottage, as he was recovering from an illness and had recently had a stroke. Mariam cooked for everyone and also provided for the whole family. Mariam also employs a full-time domestic worker for all the household cleaning tasks and also allows Mariam to step away from the household at any time. Discussing the future, Mariam wondered whether she would be returned to work, now age 56. She has a sizable pension, owns 3 houses, and gets some financial support from another brother who lives nearby. So in the short term, she rents out rooms in her house to cover certain costs. But Mariam's family is complex, but smaller in number when we look compared to Joy's. And this is a reflection of what was going on across the sample more broadly. So in conclusion, it is essential to understand care for an older person within a network of care responsibilities. In some households, care responsibilities are limited to biological children and parents. In others, the responsibility stretches to include nephews and nieces, adult siblings, and others. And the family maps give us a sense of the radius of responsibility, the range and number of dependents in each kin group, and how caring for an older person occurs in this wider set of care relations and interdependencies. Furthermore, care for an older person in South Africa occurs in highly disparate contexts. In some households, there's extensive care needs and very limited resources, even in the presence of an employed household member. In other cases, the care needs may be just as extensive, but there's far more resources in terms of time, space, and money. So although only the rich can afford privately run residential institutions, people living in middle to upper income households can purchase some personal care in their own home and insure themselves against a variety of health risks. When an older person, one of the important points of this research was showed that when an older person becomes ill and cannot act as a primary caregiver for children, huge gaps in the formal and informal childcare provision are exposed. The state has largely ignored the role that older persons have been taking over the last 2 or 3 decades and beyond in contributing to the economy and to families. And this work is now being carried by the next generation of women. The high level of dependence and caring responsibilities in contemporary South Africa, especially for employed women in Black, low to middle income households, represent a risk of overburden to those on whom the state relies. The state's historical and current role in the care process has shaped the racialized, gendered, and class distribution of care work for older persons. Now, the state's feminist policies have pushed care further into the private family space, deepening inequalities across and within households. And there's a pressing need to develop a paid social care sector that can relate to local beliefs and values and norms and provide affordable care that families are willing and able to access. Policy that assumes families will provide care or forces them to do so or compels them to do so should take into account wider socioeconomic changes, such as women's increase in employment and in the labour force. If they do not do so, these policies will fail to transform, or these actions will fail to transform families, family practices, and will fail to promote racial and gender equality. Thank you.
Good afternoon, viewers, to whichever part of the world that you are watching me from. I'm speaking to you from Lusaka, Zambia. My name's Dr. Isaac KABELENGA. I'm a lecturer for postgraduate and undergraduate students at the University of Zambia, and I'm also a senior researcher at the Zambian Center for Poverty Reduction and Research Limited. I would like to speak to you about the normative understanding of good family caregiving of older persons in rural and urban Zambia. So my presentation focuses on normative understanding of good family caregiving of older persons in rural and urban Zambia. So I would like first to talk about the statement of the problem that has motivated this paper. So research gaps exist in global knowledge about normative understanding of good family caregiving of older people in rural and urban Zambia and the whole African continent. And this is because there are inadequate studies about the determinants of normative good family caregiving of older people in Zambia. Available literature is dominated by scholars from global north. And because of that, available scientific literature on normative care of older persons does not adequately represent the voice of the people in global south. Now, because of that, the aim of this study is to address the gap in normative care of older persons by using Zambia as a reference point. To be specific, the aim of the paper is to assess the normative determinants of good family caregiving of older persons in rural and urban Zambia using the concept of local ways of knowing and doing. And when you say the concept of local ways of knowing and doing, it is referring to actually the people who are in local communities of Zambia who knew, for example, why some older persons were taken good care of by family members and others were not taken good care of by family members. So the question which this paper intends to answer is, what makes older people in both rural and urban Zambia to receive good care from the family members and others not to receive good care from the family? In terms of methodology, this study was qualitative in nature, which involved conducting 34 interviews from 35 participants. So of the 34 interviews, 29 were individual interviews and 5 were focused group discussions. The participants were community leaders who had participated in addressing elder abuse, and those included the chiefs, village admin, social workers, teachers, the courts, the courts of law, lawyers, the magistrates, the judges, as well as the medical personnel that included the doctors and the nurses. In terms of analysis, data analysis was analyzed thematically and also using a content analysis. The result of the study is indicated that there are 3 normative issues that affect the normative care of older persons in rural and urban Zambia. And the normative factors were good relationships with the family and local community members. And then another normative issue is active participation in religious affairs in area days. And then the last normative issue was having economic investments during days of economic productivity. Let me quickly give some more information about each of these normative issues. So from the findings in both rural and urban Zambia, it was evident that some older persons were taken good care of by their family members because they had good family relationship with their family and local community members during their area days of economic productivity. It was evident that those older persons who actually had good relationship with their family members during days of productivity, they were able to be taken care of when they were too old to take care of themselves. So from there, we are able to see that there is the element of reciprocity. Because they did good to their family members when they were young, their family members are also able to take care of them when they were too old to take care of themselves. The second normative issue that came out from the study was active participation in religious activities during their area days. It was evident from the views of the participants that a number of older persons who were well taken care of in old days when they were not able to take care of themselves were those who were active in religious activities like the Catholic priests, the pastors, and so forth. Those were taken care of because they actively participated in religious activities when they were actually young. And there's also another normative issue that affects good care of older persons from the views of the participants, and that is having economic investments during days of economic productivity. The study established that older persons who were well taken care of were those who were economically well off, and those who were not well off were not well taken care of. And that was because family members participated, benefited by taking care of older persons who were economically well off than those who were not economically well off. So when we look at these three normative issues, it can be concluded that all the participants in rural and urban Zambia, they all constructed the normative care of older persons in similar ways. That is because they all brought out the three normative issues that I've discussed. So on the basis of that, it can be concluded that the perspectives brought out by the participants were not mere coincidences. Rather, the participants talked about what they knew on the basis of local ways of knowing and doing about the normative care of older persons in Zambia. So what we now can conclude from this study is that the perspectives provided by the respondents, they seem to be different from the perspectives provided by scholars in Global North about normative care. For example, scholars in Global North, they refuse that actually the concept of reciprocity does not play a major role in the care of older persons by family members. Unfortunately, in the context of Zambia, the participants felt that it played a major role in the care of the older persons. So because the voice of the participants have been brought into the mainstream scientific knowledge on normative care of older persons, this study concludes that this paper has broadened scientific knowledge about the normative care of older persons, and that is because the voice of the community members from Global South and in particular Zambia has been brought into the mainstream debates about normative care of older persons. And given that the normative care of older persons is a global issue, the issues raised by this study are significant policy implications in both Zambia and Global South, because it raises the issues of having good family relationships, it raises the issues of having strong social protection for older persons, and it raises also the issues of people, for example, having good community relationships. These are key in influencing the care of the older persons. So I just hope that this presentation has added knowledge to the global scientific knowledge and will spark intense debates about care of the older persons. Thank you, and you are free to contact me for further comments and questions, even for further collaborations on research, publications, and book writing. Thank you.
Good day. The title of my presentation is Family Caregiving of Older Persons in Marginalized Communities in the Khomas region of Namibia. My name is Janet Ananias. I'm teaching in the social work program at the University of Namibia, and my co-author is Nora Ketting from the Northwest University in South Africa. The purpose of our paper is based on the increased longevity of older persons, but going along with it is that people are still getting older, and as they are getting older and suffering from diseases, they are in need of care, and therefore care has become a high global priority issue all over the world. However, in the African continent, our political leaders seems to be muted around care for older persons and have other priorities, because older persons are probably not the majority of older people as it has been the case in other parts of the world. And the belief that older persons are well supported by family members seems to be very strong amongst our leaders. not much research has been, scholarly work has been done on the care of older persons in the African continent. Therefore, this paper is trying to provide an understanding of family care to older persons. What are family carers' tasks with regards to care for older persons, and what are the consequences when they are providing this care? But we are in particularly interested in marginalized communities, different from well-resourced communities. How is care provision for older persons in Namibia? When we look at literature pertaining to Namibia, Namibia is a big country with a very low population of only 2.5 million, with a wealth of resources. Namibia as a country also went through twice colonial history. First, the German colonial rule in the 1800s and early 1900s, and then for quite a long time, the South African colonial rule. And during this period of apartheid was introduced, and a lot of inequalities, looking at the indigenous Namibians compared to the ones who were in control and power, there was huge inequalities, and the wealth of resources that the country had has also been depleted. But Namibian people have also opposed the colonial oppression, and as a result of the opposition, the first genocide was perpetrated the first genocide in the 19th century was perpetrated in Namibia, and our people also staged a liberation war until we gained our independence in 1919. All of that history is also impacting the older persons right now. The total percentage of older persons in Namibia is about 7% of people are older than 60 years. And Namibia has a moderately welfare system with a non-contributory pension provided to each and every citizen above the age of 60 years. Literature around family responsibilities for care is looking at the intergenerational resources being depleted because of globalization and westernization and colonialization. Family care in marginalized communities is quite challenging and difficult in what this limited literature is highlighting, but not much is being stated in the literature around care tasks in the relationships, who in the family is providing care in the sub-Saharan African region. And so our study would want to complement those gaps in the literature. The research setting. The study was carried out in Namibia. There's the map of Namibia, and there are 14 regions, but we focused on the Khomas region. That's also where we find the capital city, and the high concentration of older persons are found in the Khomas region. We looked at 2 marginalized communities in the Khomas region where we wanted to do the research. And these marginalized communities, these 2 locations, are characterized by lack of access to basic amenities such as lack of access to water, electricity, poor housing infrastructure, and because of the distances, transport has also been one of the challenges that these selected communities are suffering from. Looking at the method, it is a qualitative study using focus group discussions that we gathered information from carers, family carers. The total number of carers were 33 in 6 focus groups, 3 from the one location community and 3 from the other community. And we had a selection criteria to have a particular type of family carer who was a primary carer. In other words, amongst the family, one particular family member would be the mostly responsible for providing care to the older person. And that family member would be either an adult child, a partner, a sibling, or an extended family member who would provide care and would have had regular contact with the care receiver and would have stayed in the constituency where we did the study. From the findings, when we look at what was the profile of the participants, most of the participants or family carers were female, a very small minority were male. The majority were single, and there were also some who were married or who were divorced or were just living together, and most of them were unemployed. But the ones who would have been employed were employed in low-paid jobs. The age ranged from as young as 18 to as old as 70. Most of the participants were taking care of one care receiver family member, but there were also instances where participants would take care of two carers, like a mother and a father, or a mother and an aunt, or a brother and a father. So that would make the providing care for that particular carer much more challenging. The data analysis was done by means of thematic data analysis. The transcripts were read and read again and again by the two authors of this study, and the two authors are located in different locations, but they had several meetings to come up with themes and sub-themes. At the end of the day, the three themes that emerged from this study were: theme 1, lack of resources do impede care. Theme 2, it's individuals and it's not family members that are not a family in totality that is providing care. And theme 3, care outcomes are poor. So in the upcoming slides, we are going to look at each of these themes. Theme 1, which was lack of resources impede care. So as we already know, it's marginalized communities with lack of households, have poor income neighbors and communities. As a resource is not there, and they are unsupported, they are not supporting one another, and that resource is a limited resource. The second resource, amenities such as water, which is a necessity, is lacking. Many households do not have water. Sanitation, like toilet facilities or bathing facilities, provide care for bath for an older person. Not having water, or not having bathing facilities made care quite difficult in marginalized communities. And resources such as health services, not having access to health services, not having access to financial services makes care for families quite very, very challenging. And now the service providers in the hospitals, in the clinics, if they are not supportive and empathetic towards the older person who needs care, or the care provider, the family member who's accompanying the older person, that also makes it quite difficult for family carers to provide care. The second theme is that individuals, not families, provide care. It's quite a contrast. We talk about family care, but then in the family, it's not the family in its totality, but an individual family member that would provide care. And then when this one family member is providing care, the rest of the family members are not that supportive or contributing. They might not be there, they may not show interest, and also older persons may sense that this particular family member is supportive and would prefer that one to care and not the other family member to provide care. But the literature speaks, and the findings also have highlighted that family members have a sense of obligation to provide care. That individual family member have a sense of obligation to provide care because of a reciprocity. In many research literature is also talking about the reciprocity. I receive care as a child, and therefore as my parent is older, I should also provide care. So children are socialized to value care across generations. That is what our findings have highlighted. And care is provided because there's no choice. There's no one. That individual may take up the care responsibility because there is no one else who would provide the care although it's also out of obligation. The third theme is highlighting that care outcomes are poor. Now, the carer who may have given up employment, given up opportunities for studies, there's very limited opportunities because this carer is already living in impoverished circumstances. And if this carer has dependents like children, those ones would also continue to remain in poor circumstances. They remain in poverty. Older persons are also left with younger children. Yeah, we know older parents love their youngest children, and they may want to care for their younger children, but at the end, they also need care. But if this young child should provide care to the older person, that in itself leads to poor care. And another poor outcome is that carers may feel trapped. They feel trapped. There's no way out. They just have to press on and on and on with this care. There's no other way. And that makes them feel very frustrated, feelings of resentment, and that can in itself also result into not providing the best quality care to older persons. So as a discussion, lack of resources over generations, you know, I made reference to the colonial history, the inequalities, long years of poverty over lifespan, that results in an unending cycle of marginalization for family carers. We know African communities talks about Ubuntu, the phrase of I am because you are. But the question here is that sense of Ubuntu still present in African communities, family care? It does not seem to be the case. And carers, their dependents, an older person seems to be negatively affected by these poor outcomes that has been highlighted in the findings. As a conclusion, policy. We do not have policy, updated policy and legislation generally in Namibia, and in particular, policy on long-term care. And in the absence of policy, programs or interventions might not really be enforced because of the absence of policy. And perhaps this paper could lead to advocating for better considerations of policy. And carers, we learned that it's one person providing care amongst the family members, and there's little breaks or respite. Policy should perhaps consider respite. How can the carers also get a break and get some re-energized when they get a break? And resource mobilization. If they are providing care in impoverished resource communities is also very challenging. And how can one go about to provide some resources to make sure that carers have some form of support or some form of things to rely on? So that is what I've been highlighted, that we want to see this paper lead towards advocacy and influencing policy. Thank you very much for listening. And I'm using these other phrases to say thank you in the many Namibian languages, because we are a diverse community. So thank you. Pandu, Okuhepa, Kangan, Tapandula, Filen Danga, Keloboha. Here are our contact details should you have need some further contact. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Thandie HLABANA. I am a lecturer at the National University of Lesotho, and I'm going to share a paper that I've been working on with Dr. Penny Vera Sanso from University of London, and we'll be talking to you about situating masculinity, labor migration, and care over the life course. And we are looking at the experiences of older Basotho men and the hazard of survivor bias. The motivation for this work, really, we are motivated by clear biases in the literature on later life. Specifically, this literature seems to focus on women as carers. There is an assumption of older people as receiving care and not providing it. and then the analytical disembedding of care from wider social processes. And we believe that these biases are driven by perspectives that see the care economy and later life as a social and economic residual and a welfare problem that society must address. The knowledge gap that we are trying to fill. So current perspectives objectify older people and erase their role in both production and the care economy. They push the determinants of care outside the analytical frame, leaving few explanatory options other than the assumption of enduring later life reality and the failure of younger generations to counter the impacts of age and gendered deficits. We believe such an approach drives research into calling for yet more policy recommendations on care provision, irrespective of the applicability to the context that has been applied. Okay, we borrow from sociological perspectives that present highly specific social arrangements as a social norm in society. And basically, we have this breadwinner vision of family-based gender roles in which men leave the home to earn cash incomes while the women stay at home to undertake non-productive care work. This framework seems to position care as non-productive activity and of course of low exchange value. And we decided for this research to step back from a preconceived model of what care is and who does it. We are broadening our understanding of care, where we wonder how men would understand and relate to care, having spent a lot of their lives away from their homes and families as boys and men. Theorizing what makes care possible and how migrant men in Lesotho would be positioned in that making. We conceptualize care or caring involving 3 dimensions. One, we're looking at anchoring care by providing the resources that are needed for that care to happen. Number 2, we are talking about direct care work, where the men themselves will be offering care, but also we're talking about how these men might also be receiving that care. And it's important to note that each dimension is seen as being active. We're using a historical and a phenomenological approach to swim against this tide that is paternalistic and of course stigmatizing. We use in-depth interviews with 9 former mine workers who were labor migrants in South Africa, and they were aged 58 to 80 years in our study. We asked them about their roles in and of course in experiencing of care and caring and how that could have changed over their life course when they were in the mines, as they were coming back home, and now in later life as elderly men. We tie roles and experiences into wider social, economic, and demographic processes, and we demonstrate how these have impacted masculine ideals and gendered relations. Just to give you a little bit of background on Lesotho, the Kingdom of Lesotho is a small mountainous country completely surrounded by South Africa. It has often been a labor reserve during the apartheid era in South Africa. It is a very traditional society where some men as early as 4 years tend to leave their homes and continue to, and their communities to go and fend for their families through herding. However, once they were fit, they would migrate to South Africa and work in the mines. At some point, some research showed that 60% of Basotho men had worked in South African mines. However, with recent retrenchments in the mining industry in the 1990s and 2000, many came home, unfortunately unemployed. They couldn't be employed here at home because they were uneducated, because the mining industry at the time did not require education from them, but their muscle. We also see sharp increases in female labor migration at this time, but it's important to highlight that 75% of households in Lesotho are poor and vulnerable with a 25% HIV prevalence. Nonetheless, the government offers a social pension for anyone who's 70 years and above. What came out from the study is that we saw a lot of emphasis on responsibility as care. Instead of describing their motivation as driven by responsibility, men reported that they were motivated by care and caring. Their markers of care were caring enough for them to be risking their lives in the mines and living in difficult conditions just to be able to provide for their families. They cared enough to send the majority of their money home to support relatives, families. They cared enough to return home as well to be with their wives right now. We live in a world where money is more important than anything, they said. People need money to eat and clothe. Therefore, if one is able to provide for such, then that is indeed care. Another said, in life, the most important things are to have your own home, that's your house, and to be able to educate your children. These are the most important things a man would feel really proud to have achieved. So having provided that, that is care. I worked hard, another said, to get out of the hole, that is the mining pit, so that I could earn more money. And this meant I was able to care for more people, so caring beyond his family. They cared there for these men. They anchored care, they oversaw care, they directly provided care, and they did so over their life course. And therefore, caring and care is defined in this cohort as masculinity. However, I asked the men, what about you? What type of care were you receiving? In a society in which later life care is only available from families, we did expect that the care will be family-based. And these men emphasized on respect as care from their families. We call respect hlompo in Sesotho. Respect was a term that frequently came out demonstrating an empathetic recognition of what the miners had gone through in order to care for their families. Underpinning this was a strong sense of reciprocation. My wife washed my clothes. She made sure that I was clean, looked responsible or respectable before the community and among other men. I had sufficient food because she cooked for me, and therefore I did not lack any care. She provided for my needs accordingly. The respect she gave me was amazing, and for him that was care that he received. We also recognize that there are other men who did not necessarily receive the care, like the positive care. At first, things had not changed when I was retrenched. But once things got tight, that is money, in the family, and we did not live that prior life that she was used to, things changed. I do not even know how much my wife earns from the firm she works for. She says she's the one who wakes up in the morning. She calls me a head boy now, and I was always given food before. But right now, I have to make my own food. I have to wash my own clothes. I do not feel respected. So some felt being abandoned now that they were not working and offering that care. And this one says, I am reprimanded as my children. I'm going to pass this one. Another said, he gets disrespected and we eventually commit suicide or think about it. Some go as far as losing their minds or staying in the streets. Men go through a lot when they get such negative treatment. And therefore, receiving care was tied to masculinity, but not the competitive type of masculinity. It emphasized femininity or gendered hierarchies as theorized by Cornell and Messerschmitt. All right, we also recognized what we call a survival bias. As you noticed earlier on, there was an analysis by one of our research participants and evidence of high male mortality and suicide rates, especially in middle age. And this provides possible explanations why the research team were able to locate some of these men. And for a majority of Basotho men, to establish valued identity, expel them from their homes and their communities for a very long time. These are the lives of accumulated disadvantage that bring premature mortality, on which the concept of hegemonic masculinity sheds little light on. Just, I have 1 minute, but I think I can stop here, Caroline.
We have Janet and Thandie here and myself, Elena. We are hoping Isaac will join us. He was with us, but connectivity is poor. It's storm season down here in Southern Africa, so there's lots of poor connectivity going on at the moment. I don't know if there's any questions. I've been told there aren't many questions, but I hope you have all enjoyed listening to our contributions. And I suppose I'll hand over to Janet and Thandie. Janet, if you want to say a word or two.
Yeah, so I just wanted to thank the audience for listening to us. As Elena said in the beginning, the objective of this presentation was for us to also bring some dialogue and bring forward some input from the Global South around care for older persons. And hopefully that should lead into some further discussions, but also policy development. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. And Thandie?
All right. Hi, Elena. Hi, Janet. And hi, everyone. This is quite an opportunity for us to share this work. We have been working on it for quite a while with Elena and a bigger group. So it's been a great opportunity. And I just thought I should just highlight that my contribution specifically was just to add, we always talk about women, and I thought it's important that we do add men into an understanding of their care and the care for the life course, over the life course. And so I hope that this work is helping everyone just to maybe see a different dynamic that we're bringing into different discussions and add into scholarship about the experiences of men, but not just experiences of men, masculinity literature as well. Thanks, Elena.
Thanks, Thandie. Thanks, and Janet. And yeah, just to add, I think one of our main aims with this work and sets of work is to really highlight the kind of the heterogeneity of family care practices across the region. Often it's assumed or kind of taken for granted that the family will care across the region evenly. But as we kind of mentioned, and we'll go into more detail in other papers and in other sessions later in the conference, that whilst there is like similarities across these kind of colonial histories and post-colonial political and economic contexts, there's vast differences in not only the size of the populations of older persons, but also the kind of the as I mentioned, the social protection landscape, the economic landscape, even the kind of the number of women in the labor force, as an example. So I hope the different papers have given some insight into those differences. And as I said, we are on our way to publishing this material as a special issue in the International Journal of Care and Caring. So the final versions of these papers and presentations and papers will hopefully be available to read in detail in February 2023. So thanks everybody, Janet, Thandie and Isaac, who unfortunately can't be with us now. And Caroline, if there's no further questions, I'm happy with that to leave it there. Thanks.